November 30th, 1939. 0800 hours. Kollaa River, eastern Finland. 33-year-old Simo Häyhä crouched in a snow trench barely 3 feet deep, his M/28-30 rifle resting against a packed wall of ice. The temperature had dropped to negative 40 degrees Celsius overnight. His breath would give away his position if he exhaled normally, so he had learned something his first week of combat that would define his entire methodology. He held snow in his mouth. When he needed to breathe, the snow absorbed the vapor. No steam, no detection, no death. Across the frozen wasteland of the Kollaa sector, the largest military force ever assembled against Finland was preparing its morning assault. The Red Army had committed over 450,000 soldiers, 3,000 tanks, and 900 aircraft to crush Finnish resistance in what Joseph Stalin called a minor police action that would be concluded within weeks. Soviet propaganda promised Red Army soldiers they would celebrate New Year's Eve in Helsinki. Finnish commanders knew the mathematics of the situation. They were outnumbered 5-1 in infantry, 100-1 in tanks, and 30-1 in aircraft. By every calculation of conventional military wisdom, Finland should have collapsed within 72 hours. Simo Häyhä had been a farmer 7 weeks earlier. He owned 65 acres of land in Rotjärvi municipality, grew potatoes and rye, and hunted elk in the forest surrounding his property. He stood 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 143 pounds. He had completed his mandatory military service in the Finnish army between 1925 and 1927, earning the rank of corporal in the bicycle battalion, but had spent the subsequent 12 years working his land and living quietly in the rural isolation of the Finnish-Soviet border region. When the Soviet Union invalidated its non-aggression pact with Finland on November 30th and launched a full-scale invasion, Häyhä reported to the mobilization center in Viipuri with the same rifle he used for hunting, a Finnish-made Mosin-Nagant variant with iron sights. The Finnish military command had assigned him to 6th Company, JR 34, Infantry Regiment 34, operating in the Kollaa sector under Major General Viljo Tuompo. His company commander, Captain Arjen Juutalainen, had interviewed every mobilized reservist personally to determine their skills. When Häyhä mentioned he had been hunting since age 5 and could hit running elk at 300 meters, Juutalainen assigned him to sniper duties without additional training. The Finnish army had no formal sniper school in 1939. They simply handed rifles to men who could already shoot and told them to kill officers, artillery observers, and machine gun crews. What separated Simo Häyhä from every other Finnish soldier handed a scope rifle was a combination of childhood experience, physical adaptation, and tactical philosophy that would make him the most lethal individual combatant in recorded military history. He had grown up in one of the coldest regions of Finland, learning to hunt in conditions that would hospitalize soldiers from temperate climates. He understood how snow crystals reflected light, how wind patterns changed with temperature variations, how animal behavior indicated human presence. His small stature, which might have been a liability in hand-to-hand combat, made him nearly impossible to spot in a properly constructed hide. And most critically, he had developed a hunting philosophy that translated perfectly to military sniping. Patience, stillness, and the acceptance that a successful hunt might require 16 hours of motionless waiting for a single shot. By December 7, 1939, 1 week into the Winter War, Simo Häyhä had killed 22 Soviet soldiers. His company commander noted this in the daily combat log with surprise, but not astonishment. Several Finnish snipers were achieving double-digit kills in the target-rich environment of mass Soviet assaults. What made Häyhä different was his method. He never used a telescopic sight. The Finnish army had scoped Mosin-Nagants available, but Häyhä refused them. His reasoning was tactically sound. A telescopic sight required the shooter to raise his head an additional 3 inches to achieve proper eye relief, increasing his visible profile. The glass lenses of a scope could reflect sunlight or moonlight, creating a glint visible to Soviet counter-snipers at 800 meters, and in temperatures below negative 30 Celsius. The moving parts of a telescopic sight could freeze, jam, or fog with condensation from the shooter's body heat. Instead, Häyhä used the standard iron sights of his M/28-30 rifle, a front post and rear notch that required perfect alignment between the shooter's eye, the rear sight, the front sight, and the target. This iron sight system limited effective range to approximately 400 meters in ideal conditions and required exceptional eyesight and muscle memory. But it made Häyhä nearly invisible. His head barely rose above the snow line. No glass reflected light. No scope shadow gave away his position. He became what Soviet soldiers would begin calling Belaya Smert, the White Death, a ghost that killed from nowhere, The Soviet 44th Rifle Division launched its first major assault against the Kollaa sector at 0900 hours on December 7th. Regimental Commander Ivan Govorikov had been promised by his division commander that Finnish resistance would collapse like a rotten door once Soviet numerical superiority was properly applied. Govorikov committed 3 full infantry battalions, approximately 2,400 soldiers, to a frontal assault across the frozen Kollaa River. His battle plan assumed that massed infantry, supported by artillery preparation fires and machine gun suppression, would overwhelm the outnumbered Finns through sheer volume of fire and physical presence. Simo Häyhä watched the assault develop from a position he had prepared during the night. He had dug down through 4 feet of snow to reach frozen earth, then packed the excavated snow into a wall, with a firing aperture exactly 11 inches wide. He had placed a white sheet over his position, scattered loose snow across the sheet, and positioned himself so that his rifle barrel would not extend beyond the firing aperture. The entire hide was invisible at 50 meters. Soviet infantry advancing across open ground would pass within 200 meters of his position without detecting him. The first Soviet soldier Häyhä killed that morning was a lieutenant leading a rifle platoon across the ice. Häyhä watched through his iron sights as the officer gestured to his men, pointing toward Finnish defensive positions 400 meters north of Häyhä's location. The lieutenant was moving quickly, shouting orders, creating the kind of command presence that junior officers were trained to project. He was also making himself the most obvious target on the battlefield. Häyhä centered his front sight post on the lieutenant's chest, controlled his breathing, and pressed a trigger. The M/28-30 fired a 7.62 X53 MMR cartridge, a full-powered rifle round with enough energy to penetrate Soviet winter uniforms at 600 meters. The lieutenant collapsed instantly. His platoon hesitated, confused about where the shot had originated. Over the next 4 hours, Simo Häyhä killed 16 more Soviet soldiers. He did not fire rapidly. His rate of fire averaged 1 shot every 14 minutes. Each shot was deliberate, calculated, and preceded by extensive observation. He targeted officers first, identified by their map cases and binoculars. Then he targeted soldiers carrying radios, the heavy RBM radio sets that Soviet forward observers used to call artillery strikes. Then he targeted machine gun crews, specifically the gunners who carried the distinctive ammunition belts. By 1300 hours, when the Soviet assault finally broke and retreated back across the Kollaa River, the 44th Rifle Division had lost 163 soldiers killed and over 300 wounded. 17 of those deaths were attributed to a single Finnish sniper who had fired from position that Soviet scouts never located. The methodology Simo Häyhä employed during that December 7th engagement would remain consistent across the next 98 days of combat. He never fired from the same position twice. He never engaged targets at ranges beyond 350 meters, staying within the effective range of his iron sights and ensuring first-round kills. He never took hasty shots. He never fired at Soviet soldiers who were not tactically significant targets. He ignored riflemen and focused exclusively on officers, observers, machine gunners, and mortar crews whose deaths would degrade Soviet operational capability. And he never, under any circumstances, allowed curiosity or emotion to compromise his discipline. When Soviet soldiers walked within 20 meters of his hide searching for him, he remained motionless for hours until they gave up and moved away. By December 21st, 1939, Simo Häyhä had killed 97 Soviet soldiers in confirmed engagements recorded by his company commander. This number represented only the kills that could be directly observed and verified by Finnish officers or fellow soldiers. The actual number was likely higher. Finnish military protocol required that sniper kills be confirmed by a second witness to be counted in official records. Many of Häyhä's engagements occurred in isolated sectors where no other Finnish soldiers were present to provide confirmation. His company commander estimated the true number was closer to 130. The Soviet 44th Rifle Division, which had entered the Kollaa sector with full strength of 14,000 soldiers, had been reduced to fewer than 8,000 combat-effective troops by Christmas 1939. Soviet after-action reports attributed the catastrophic casualties to Finnish ski troops and inadequate winter clothing. But Soviet soldiers understood the real problem. They were being hunted. Every morning assault, every patrol, every supply column movement resulted in officers and key personnel being killed by invisible shooters. Soviet morale collapsed. Soldiers refused to leave defensive positions. Junior officers removed their rank insignia and carried rifles instead of pistols to avoid being identified as targets. Radio operators destroyed their radio sets rather than carry them forward, where Finnish snipers would kill them instantly. On December 22, 1939, the Soviet Stavka, the High Command in Moscow, issued a directive specifically focused on the sniper problem in Finland. The directive acknowledged that Finnish snipers were achieving unprecedented kill ratios and were paralyzing offensive operations through selective elimination of command and control personnel. The Stavka ordered the formation of dedicated counter-sniper units, equipped with scoped Mosin Nagant rifles and trained specifically to hunt Finnish shooters. The Soviet Army also began deploying artillery-forward observers whose sole mission was to identify Finnish sniper positions and call immediate suppression fires. By late December, the Red Army was committing entire artillery batteries, 6 122mm howitzers firing 18 rounds each, to destroy single suspected sniper positions. Simo Häyhä adapted immediately. He began moving positions every 2 hours, even if he had not fired. He dug multiple hides in overlapping fields of fire, rotating between them randomly. He started using decoy positions, empty snow hides with wooden mannequins dressed in Finnish uniforms, to draw Soviet fire and reveal counter-sniper locations. And most effectively, he began hunting Soviet counter-snipers. When Soviet scouts established observation posts to watch for Finnish shooters, Häyhä would identify the observation posts through patient surveillance, then engage them from unexpected angles. He killed 11 Soviet counter-snipers between December 23rd and December 31st, identified by the scoped rifles recovered from their bodies. The kill count that would make Simo Häyhä legendary was maintained through a simple but rigorous verification system. His company commander, Captain Arn Jytläinen, required that every sniper kill be recorded with specific details: date, time, location, range, type of target, and witness confirmation. Jytläinen maintained a daily log that tracked each sniper in 6 company individually. By January 15, 1940, the log showed that Simo Häyhä had achieved 189 confirmed kills, more than the next 3 most successful Finnish snipers combined. His average was 4.7 kills per day of active combat. He had been wounded once, suffering a minor shrapnel injury to his left shoulder from a Soviet mortar round, but had refused medical evacuation and returned to duty after 6 hours. What terrified Soviet commanders was not just lethality, but the consistency. Other Finnish snipers had great days and quiet days, periods of high activity, and periods where weather or Soviet counter-tactics reduced their effectiveness. Simo Häyhä killed Soviet soldiers every single day, in temperatures that dropped to negative 43 degrees Celsius, during blizzards with visibility under 50 meters, during the brief 4-hour periods of winter daylight, and during the endless Arctic nights when Soviet troops thought darkness would protect them. He operated alone, without a spotter, navigating through forests and across frozen lakes to reach firing positions that Soviet planners had dismissed as inaccessible. He carried no radio, no map, no compass. He knew the Kollaa sector terrain with the intimate familiarity of a man who had hunted those forests for 28 years. The Soviet 44th Rifle Division commander, Major General Alexei Vinogradov, became obsessed with eliminating the Finnish sniper who his soldiers called the White Death. Vinogradov ordered his intelligence section to compile every available piece of information about Finnish sniper tactics, equipment, and methodology. Soviet prisoners from failed assaults were interrogated specifically about whether they had seen Finnish snipers and where those snipers had been positioned. Captured Finnish soldiers were tortured for information about sniper training and unit assignments. By January 20th, Soviet intelligence had concluded that the most effective Finnish sniper was operating in a specific 4-kilometer sector of the Kollaa line, was using iron sights rather than a scope, and was likely a local resident with extensive knowledge of the terrain. Vinogradov made a decision that would define Soviet counter-sniper doctrine for the rest of World War II. He would commit dedicated hunter-killer teams equipped with specialized weapons to eliminate high-value Finnish snipers. On January 23, 1940, the Soviet 44th Rifle Division received 12 SVT-40 semi-automatic rifles equipped with 3.5 XPU telescopic sights, the most advanced sniper system in the Red Army inventory. These rifles were distributed to counter-sniper teams composed of experienced marksmen pulled from regular rifle companies. Each team was assigned a specific sector and given orders to locate and destroy the White Death. Simo Häyhä killed the first Soviet counter-sniper team sent to hunt him on January 26, 1940. The team had established an observation post in a destroyed Finnish farmhouse, positioned themselves in the attic with a clear field of view across 500 meters of frozen terrain. They spent 3 days watching for Finnish sniper activity, rotating observers every 4 hours to maintain constant surveillance. On the 3rd day, they saw movement in a tree line 800 meters north, a flash of white fabric against dark pine bark. The senior Soviet sniper, a Ukrainian named Mikhail Ivanovich Kulikov with 43 confirmed kills from the Spanish Civil War, identified the movement as a Finnish sniper changing positions. He radioed for artillery support, calling a fire mission on the suspected Finnish position. What Kulikov had actually seen was one of Häyhä's decoy positions, a white sheet hung on a branch with a rope system that allowed Häyhä to create movement from 300 meters away. When the Soviet artillery fire landed on the empty decoy position, Häyhä marked the origin of the radio call. Over the next 6 hours, he navigated through deep snow to reach a firing position overlooking the destroyed farmhouse. At 1,620 hours, when the winter sun was at the perfect angle to illuminate the farmhouse attic without backlighting Häyhä's position, he saw the glint of glass, the Soviet sniper's telescopic sight catching the sunlight. Häyhä fired once. Kulikov died instantly, shot through the head at 290 meters. The second member of the Soviet counter-sniper team fled the farmhouse and was killed by a Finnish machine gun crew while running across open ground. Between January 26 and February 17, 1940, Simo Häyhä killed 7 more Soviet counter-snipers. His methodology was identical in every engagement. He used decoys to force the Soviets to reveal their positions, then maneuver to advantageous firing positions, and engage them when they were focused on the decoy locations. The Soviet 44th Rifle Division lost every specialist sniper sent to the Kollaa sector. By mid-February, Soviet counter-sniper teams refused to operate in Häyhä's area of operations. When ordered forward, they would establish positions in safe rear areas and file false reports claiming they had conducted patrols. Soviet morale had deteriorated to the point where junior officers openly discussed the White Death as supernatural, a ghost that could not be killed by conventional means. Simo Häyhä's confirmed kill count reached 312 on February 17, 1940. This number represented only his rifle kills, verified and recorded in official Finnish military records. It did not include an additional estimated 200 Soviet soldiers that Häyhä killed using a KP/-31 submachine gun during close-quarters combat when Soviet infantry overran Finnish positions. Finnish Doctrine did not count submachine gun kills towards sniper totals because they were not precision engagements. If those kills were included, Häyhä's total exceeded 500 Soviet soldiers killed in 79 days of continuous combat. The tactical impact of a single Finnish sniper achieving over 300 confirmed kills cannot be overstated. Soviet battalion commanders in the Kollaa sector modified their entire operational approach because of Häyhä. They stopped conducting daylight patrols. They refused to position forward observers in exposed locations. They moved supply columns only at night, despite the navigational difficulties. They abandoned aggressive reconnaissance in favor of passive defense. A single Finnish soldier, weighing 143 pounds and armed with an unmodified hunting rifle, had effectively paralyzed offensive operations by a Soviet rifle division of 14,000 soldiers. But Soviet commanders understood a fundamental military truth. No soldier is invincible, no matter how skilled. On February 21, 1940, the Soviet Stavka authorized the 44th Rifle Division to employ any means necessary to eliminate the White Death. What followed would be the most intensive manhunt in winter war history. February 22, 1940, 0630 hours. Kollaa sector, temperature -38 degrees Celsius. Major General Alexei Vinogradov stood in the command bunker of the 44th Rifle Division headquarters, studying the tactical map of the Kollaa sector with the intensity of a man whose career depended on solving a single problem. Red pins marked every location where Soviet officers had been killed by sniper fire over the past 82 days. The pins clustered in a 4-kilometer zone along the eastern bank of the Kollaa River, a sector that Soviet intelligence had designated Zone White Death. Vinogradov had lost 397 soldiers killed and over 600 wounded in this single sector since December 1st. His division, which had been rated combat effective at 93% strength when it crossed the Finnish border, was now at 54% effectiveness. The Soviet Stavka had sent 3 separate investigation teams to determine why the 44th Rifle Division had failed to break through Finnish lines. All 3 teams had reached the same conclusion. Finnish snipers were destroying Soviet command and control faster than it could be reconstituted. Vinogradov had tried conventional counter-sniper tactics and failed. He had tried artillery suppression and failed. He had tried massed infantry assaults designed to overwhelm Finnish positions through numerical superiority, and those had failed catastrophically. Now, he was implementing a strategy that had been personally approved by Marshal Kliment Voroshilov, the Soviet defense commissar. He would use every available resource, artillery, aircraft, infantry, and specialized hunter teams, simultaneously to saturate Zone White Death with such overwhelming firepower that the Finnish sniper could not possibly survive. The operation began at 0700 hours with artillery preparation. Soviet 122mm howitzers from a 44th Division's Organic Artillery Regiment, reinforced by 2 battalions of 152mm guns from Corps Artillery, opened fire on Zone White Death. The bombardment was not aimed at specific targets. Instead, Soviet forward observers divided the 4-kilometer zone into 100-meter squares and called time-on-target missions on each square sequentially. The goal was not precision. It was area denial. Every square meter terrain where the Finnish sniper might be hiding would receive at least 6 high-explosive rounds. Soviet artillery doctrine calculated that 6 122mm rounds impacting within a 100-meter square had a 93% probability of killing any soldier in that area, even a soldier in a prepared fighting position. Simo Häyhä heard the first artillery rounds impact at 0703 hours. He was positioned in a snow-hide 320 meters south of his previous day's position, dug in beneath the interlocking branches of 3 fallen pine trees. The artillery fire was landing 800 meters north, loud enough to be clearly audible, but not close enough to be immediately dangerous. He recognized the Soviet tactic immediately. They were conducting a systematic sweep, destroying terrain sequentially in hopes of killing him through statistical probability rather than aimed fire. He calculated he had approximately 40 minutes before the artillery barrage reached his current position. He did not panic. Panic was a biological response to perceived danger, and Häyhä had trained himself over 28 years of hunting to suppress panic through rational analysis. The artillery barrage told him 3 things. First, the Soviets had committed significant resources to killing him specifically, which meant his individual effectiveness was having strategic impact. Second, the Soviets did not know his current location, or they would be concentrating fire on that location rather than conducting an area sweep. Third, he needed to move immediately to a position outside the projected artillery impact zone, and he needed to move without being detected by Soviet observers who were certainly watching the area with binoculars and telescopes. At 0709 hours, Simo Häyhä began what would be the most dangerous movement of his military career. He crawled backwards out of his hide, staying beneath the fallen pine branches, moving at a rate of approximately 3 meters per minute. Speed would create visible movement. Slow, deliberate motion, matched to the natural swaying of branches in the wind, would be nearly invisible to observers watching from 800 meters away. He crawled for 27 minutes, covering 81 meters, until he reached a depression in the terrain that provided cover from direct observation. Then he stood, oriented himself using the sun position and his intimate knowledge of the terrain, and began moving south at a fast walk. The artillery barrage caught up to him at 0747 hours. He was crossing an open field for 100 meters from the nearest cover when the first 122mm rounds began impacting 200 meters to his north. The explosion threw up massive columns of snow, dirt, and shattered wood. Shrapnel screamed through the air at supersonic velocities. The concussive overpressure from each explosion was powerful enough to rupture eardrums at 150 meters. Häyhä increased his pace to a run, not because he was panicking, but because the tactical situation now required speed over stealth. Soviet observers had excellent visibility across the open field, but they were also dealing with smoke and dust from the artillery impacts. He calculated he had a 67% chance of crossing the field without being spotted if he moved immediately. If he waited for the artillery to get closer, his chances dropped to near zero. He crossed the 400 meters in 4 minutes and 19 seconds, fast for a man carrying a rifle, ammunition, and winter gear through knee-deep snow. Soviet artillery rounds were now landing within 100 meters of his path, close enough that shrapnel was hissing through the air around him. At 0751 hours, a round impacted 73 meters to his left, and concussion knocked him down. He rolled with the impact, came up in a crouch, and kept moving. At 0753 hours, he reached the tree line and dove into cover. He had survived the artillery barrage. But the hunt was just beginning. At 0815 hours, Simo Häyhä observed Soviet infantry moving into Zone White Death. He was positioned on a low ridge overlooking the sector, hidden in a hastily prepared snow hide. Through his iron sights, he counted 3 Soviet rifle companies, approximately 360 soldiers, advancing in extended line formation across terrain that the artillery had just finished bombarding. The Soviet tactical concept was clear. They had softened the area with artillery, And now they were conducting a detailed ground search with enough infantry that they could physically inspect every potential hiding position. The Soviet infantry were not conducting a combat assault. They were conducting a manhunt. Soldiers moved slowly, carefully, checking every depression in the snow, every fallen tree, every cluster of bushes. Officers carried maps with the 4-kilometer zone divided into sectors, and each rifle platoon was assigned a specific sector to clear. Soviet doctrine called this a zone reconnaissance in force, a technique designed to locate hidden enemy positions to methodical ground search back by overwhelming numbers. Häyhä watched for 43 minutes without firing. He counted officers, identified the company command group by their radio operator, and noted that Soviet soldiers were staying in tight formations for mutual support. They had learned from previous encounters that isolated Soviet soldiers were easy targets for Finnish snipers. The tight formations made sense from a force protection perspective, but they also created target-rich environments. At 0858 hours, Häyhä identified his target, a Soviet captain who was coordinating the search from position 312 meters northwest of Häyhä's hide. The captain was using a map and compass to direct his subordinate platoon leaders, clearly visible because of his map case and the fact that soldiers kept approaching him for instructions. Häyhä settled his front sight post on the captain's chest, controlled his breathing, and fired. The captain collapsed. The Soviet response was immediate and overwhelming. Every soldier in the search line opened fire in the direction they thought the shot had originated. Machine guns, rifles, and submachine guns poured approximately 4,000 rounds into a 200-meter section of tree line. The volume of fire was so intense that entire trees were cut down by the impact of bullets. Soviet soldiers were not aiming at specific targets. They were conducting reconnaissance by fire, hoping to either kill the Finnish sniper or force him to move and reveal his position. Simo Häyhä remained motionless in his hide. Bullets snapped through the air above him. Branches and bark fragments rained down from the trees. The sound was deafening, a continuous roar of overlapping gunfire that lasted for 11 minutes. Soviet soldiers expended every round in their basic load, fired until their rifle barrels were too hot to touch, and then reloaded and fired again. When the firing finally stopped, the tree line looked like it had been hit by a hurricane. Every tree within 200 meters showed bullet impacts. The snow was turned into a gray slush of mud with fragments and spent brass casings. But Häyhä was untouched. His hide had been positioned beneath the root system of a fallen tree, with a massive trunk providing overhead cover. Soviet bullets had torn apart the forest around him but had not penetrated his specific position. At 0923 hours, when Soviet officers began reorganizing their soldiers for a continued advance, Häyhä crawled backwards out his hide and began moving to a new position. The Soviet manhunt continued for 6 more hours. Infantry swept through Zone White Death in multiple passes, checking terrain that had already been searched, looking for any sign of the Finnish sniper. Soviet aircraft, for Polikarpov I-16 fighters equipped with bombs, strafed suspected Finnish positions. Soviet artillery fired harassment missions on random coordinates, hoping to catch the Finnish sniper moving between positions. The 44th Rifle Division committed over 1,000 soldiers and expended an estimated 30,000 artillery rounds and 62,000 small arms rounds in a single day attempting to kill 1 Finnish soldier. Simo Häyhä killed 3 more Soviet soldiers that day. At 1,407 hours, he engaged a Soviet forward observer at 263 meters. At 1,619 hours, he killed a machine gun team leader at 301 meters. At 1,734 hours, during the brief period of twilight before full darkness, he killed a Soviet lieutenant at 229 meters. Each shot was fired from a different position. Each position was abandoned immediately after firing. By 1800 hours, when darkness made further operations impossible, Häyhä had withdrawn to Finnish rear areas to resupply and rest. The Soviet after-action report from February 22, 1940, filed by Major General Vinogradov, concluded that the day's operation had been partially successful because Finnish sniper activity had been temporarily suppressed. The report acknowledged that Soviet forces had not located the Finnish sniper position, had not found any evidence of Finnish casualties from the artillery bombardment, and had lost 4 soldiers killed, including 1 officer during the operation. The report recommended continued pressure and suggested that the Finnish sniper might have withdrawn from Zone White Death due to the intensity of Soviet operations. Vinogradov's assessment was wrong. Simo Häyhä had not withdrawn. He had adapted. Over the next 11 days, from February 23rd through March 5th, 1940, Häyhä modified his tactics to account for the increased Soviet counter-sniper pressure. He stopped operating in Zone White Death entirely during daylight hours, recognizing that Soviet observers were now focusing all their attention on that specific sector. Instead, he began infiltrating into Soviet rear areas at night, positioning himself in locations where Soviet commanders would not expect Finnish snipers to operate. He established hides within 500 meters of Soviet battalion headquarters, targeting officers as they moved between command posts. He positioned himself along Soviet supply routes, engaging truck drivers and supply column guards. He even infiltrated to within 150 meters of Soviet artillery positions, killing 4 observers before they could call fire missions. The psychological impact of this tactical shift was devastating to Soviet morale. Soviet soldiers in the Kollaa sector had accepted that frontline operations were dangerous. That was expected in combat. But when officers started being killed in rear areas that were supposed to be safe, panic spread through the entire division. Soviet battalion commanders began moving their headquarters bunkers every night. Supply convoys refused to move during daylight. Artillery forward observers demanded infantry escorts before they would conduct observation missions. The 44th Rifle Division was effectively paralyzed, unable to conduct offensive operations because their command and control infrastructure was under constant threat. Soviet intelligence officers analyzed Häyhä's new tactics and reached a disturbing conclusion. The Finnish sniper had not been suppressed or deterred by the February 22nd operation. Instead, he had learned from it and adapted his methodology. Soviet counter-sniper doctrine assumed that sustained pressure would eventually force an enemy sniper to make mistakes, to move carelessly, to fire hasty shots, to stay in positions too long. But the White Death was not following predicted patterns. He was thinking, adapting, and innovating faster than Soviet doctrine could respond. On March 1st, 1940, the Soviet Stavka issued a new directive regarding Finnish snipers. The directive acknowledged that conventional counter-sniper tactics had failed and authorized the use of extraordinary measures. The specific language was deliberately vague, but Soviet commanders understood what it meant. They were authorized to use chemical weapons, incendiary weapons, and collective punishment against Finnish civilians if those measures would help eliminate high-value Finnish snipers. Major General Vinogradov received the directive on March 2nd and made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He ordered his chemical warfare specialists to prepare chlorine gas munitions for deployment in Zone White Death. Soviet doctrine classified chlorine gas as a harassment agent rather than a lethal chemical weapon, which technically made its use compliant with the 1925 Geneva Protocol. The plan was to saturate suspected Finnish sniper positions with gas, forcing the sniper to either evacuate or suffocate. Soviet infantry wearing gas masks would then advance into the gassed area and search for bodies. The operation was scheduled for March 6, 1940. It never happened. On March 5th, Finnish intelligence intercepted Soviet radio communications discussing chemical weapons preparation. Finnish High Command immediately protested to international observers, threatening to use chemical weapons in retaliation if the Soviets proceeded. More importantly, on March 6, the Finnish government received intelligence that the Soviet Union was preparing to negotiate a ceasefire. Stalin had concluded that the Winter War was costing more than it was worth, and he was willing to accept a negotiated settlement rather than continue the increasingly expensive offensive. But Simo Häyhä did not know about the diplomatic developments. On March 6, 1940, he was operating in his usual sector, hunting Soviet officers, completely unaware that his war was about to end in the most violent and devastating way possible. March 6, 1940. 1,320 hours. Kollaa sector, temperature negative 29 degrees Celsius. Simo Häyhä was positioned in a snow hide overlooking a Soviet supply route for 160 meters south of the main Finnish defensive line. He had been in position since 0430 hours, 8 hours and 50 minutes of motionless observation. His feet were numb despite 2 pairs of wool socks and felt-lined boots. His hands were functional but painful, the cold penetrating through his mittens during the long periods when he needed to keep his trigger finger exposed. His back ached from remaining in the prone position for so long. But his eyes were sharp, his breathing was controlled, and his focus was absolute. He was watching a Soviet patrol moving along the supply route. 12 soldiers led by a junior officer, conducting a routine security sweep. The patrol was sloppy. Soldiers walked in a tight cluster, talking to each other, not maintaining proper interval or dispersing for tactical security. The officer was at the front of the formation, clearly visible because of his map case and pistol instead of a rifle. It was a kind of target Häyhä had engaged hundreds of times before, a tactically significant enemy at a range well within his capability, in terrain that provided him excellent cover and multiple withdrawal routes. What Simo Häyhä did not know was that the patrol he was observing was bait. Soviet counter-sniper teams had finally adapted to his tactics. They had studied his patterns, analyzed his previous engagement locations, and identified his preferred type of target. Then they had created a deliberately vulnerable patrol, led by an officer who was actually a disguised enlisted soldier wearing an officer's uniform. The real purpose of the patrol was to draw Finnish sniper fire. When Häyhä fired, Soviet observers positioned in hidden locations would mark the origin of his muzzle flash. Then Soviet artillery, already positioned and aimed at pre-planned target coordinates throughout the area, would immediately engage his position with direct fire. At 1,323 hours, Simo Häyhä fired at the Soviet officer. The range was 297 meters. The shot was perfect, center mass hit, instant incapacitation. The Soviet soldier wearing the officer's uniform collapsed. The rest of the patrol scattered, exactly as Häyhä expected. What happened next occurred faster than human reaction time could process. Soviet observers in 3 separate locations simultaneously spotted Häyhä's muzzle flash, a brief flare of burning propellant gases that was visible for approximately 1/8 of a second. They had been watching the suspected sniper location through binoculars and telescopes, specifically focused on the sector where they expected the Finnish sniper to fire. Within 2 seconds of Häyhä's shot, all 3 observers were radioing coordinates to Soviet artillery batteries. Within 7 seconds, Soviet 76mm guns from a 44 TH Division's direct-fire battery were traversing their barrels toward Häyhä's position. Within 11 seconds, the first 76mm round was in flight. The difference between indirect artillery fire and direct fire is critical. Indirect fire, the type of artillery Häyhä had been evading for 97 days, involves firing at targets that the gun crew cannot see, with rounds following high-arcing trajectories and landing with delays of 15 to 30 seconds between the fire command and impact. Direct fire involves artillery pieces engaging visible targets with flat trajectories, like oversized rifles. The time between trigger pull and impact at 300 meters is approximately 1.2 seconds for a 76mm shell. There is no time to react, no time to take cover, no time to do anything except hope the enemy gunner misses. The first 76mm shell hit a tree 14 meters to Häyhä's left, exploding on impact and showering his position with fragments and shrapnel. The second shell, fired 3 seconds later, hit the ground 9 meters to his right. Soviet gunners were bracketing their target, walking their rounds onto Häyhä's position using standard direct fire adjustment procedures. The third shell would hit his hide directly. At 1,323 hours and 19 seconds, Simo Häyhä made a decision that saved his life. He abandoned his position immediately, without taking time to gather his equipment or plan a withdrawal route. He simply lunged backwards out of his hide and rolled down the slope behind his position. Soviet direct fire doctrine assumed that soldiers under artillery fire would either freeze in place or retreat in predictable directions along obvious routes. Häyhä did neither. He rolled chaotically down a slope into terrain that Soviet observers could not see, moving in a way that created no predictable pattern. The third 76mm shell hit his hide position directly at 1,323 hours and 22 seconds. The explosion destroyed the hide completely, obliterating the pack's snow walls and collapsing the overhead cover. If Häyhä had remained in position for 3 more seconds, he would have been killed instantly. But he was already 23 meters away, still rolling down the slope when the shell impacted. He reached the bottom of the slope at 1,323 hours and 31 seconds, came up in a crouch, and began running. He was now in a drainage ditch that provided cover from direct observation, but Soviet artillery was still firing. Shells were impacting randomly across the area, attempting to catch him if he had survived the initial barrage. He ran for 300 meters through the ditch, then cut left into a tree line, then ran another 200 meters before finally stopping to assess the situation. He had survived the Soviet ambush, but he had lost his primary rifle. The M/28-30 that he'd used for 97 days was buried under the collapsed hide, destroyed or buried so deeply in snow and debris that recovering it was impossible. He still had his KP/-31 submachine gun, which he carried as a secondary weapon, but the submachine gun was effective only at ranges under 100 meters. For practical purposes, Simo Häyhä was no longer a sniper. He was just another Finnish infantryman. He made his way back to Finnish lines over the next 4 hours, moving carefully through terrain he knew intimately, avoiding Soviet patrols. He reached the 6th Company defensive positions at 1,741 hours and reported to his company commander, Captain Arn Jutalainen. Judalainen listened to Häyhä's description of the Soviet ambush and made an immediate decision. Häyhä needed a new rifle, and there was only one way to get one quickly. The Finnish army supply system was functioning, but requisitioning a new rifle through official channels would take days. The fastest solution was to take a rifle from a Finnish soldier who no longer needed it, someone who had been killed in action. At 18-20 hours, Simo Häyhä was issued a replacement M/28-30 rifle that had belonged to a Finnish soldier killed 2 days earlier in a Soviet artillery barrage. The rifle was functional but not identical to his previous weapon. The sight alignment was slightly different. The trigger pull was heavier. The stock fit his shoulder at a different angle. For a precision shooter who had trained for 28 years on a single rifle, these differences were significant. He would need time to adapt to the new weapon, to learn its specific characteristics, to develop the muscle memory that would allow him to shoot accurately under combat stress. He did not get that time. At 0600 hours on March 7, 1940, the Soviet 44th Rifle Division launched its largest offensive of the Winter War. Over 6,000 Soviet soldiers, supported by 47 tanks and continuous artillery support, attacked the Finnish positions in the Kollaa sector. The assault was not focused on Zone White Death. Instead, it was a broad front attack designed to overwhelm Finnish defenses through sheer numerical superiority. Soviet commanders had concluded that they could not kill the White Death through targeted counter-sniper operations, so they would break through Finnish lines with conventional assault tactics and force all Finnish defenders, including snipers, to withdraw or be encircled. Simo Häyhä was assigned to defensive positions with the rest of 6th Company. His role was not sniping. There was no time for careful, deliberate shots during a mass Soviet assault. Instead, he functioned as a standard rifleman, engaging Soviet infantry at ranges under 200 meters as they advanced toward Finnish trenches. The fighting was brutal, chaotic, and unlike anything Häyhä had experienced in his previous 97 days of sniper operations. Soviet soldiers were attacking in human waves, accepting catastrophic casualties to gain ground. Finnish defenders were firing as fast as they could reload, not aiming carefully but simply putting rounds into mass formations of enemy infantry. The battle continued for 9 hours. By 1500 hours, Soviet forces had pushed within 50 meters of the Finnish main defensive line. 6th Company had lost 37 soldiers killed and 62 wounded out of an original strength of 143. Ammunition was running critically low. Finnish officers were preparing to order a fighting withdrawal to secondary defensive positions when Soviet commanders made a tactical error that changed everything. They paused the assault to reorganize for a final push. The pause gave Finnish soldiers 12 minutes to rest, reload, and prepare for the next wave. It also gave Simo Häyhä time to do what he did best. At 1,512 hours, Häyhä identified a Soviet officer approximately 180 meters forward the Finnish line, standing in the open and directing soldiers into attack positions. The range was shorter than Häyhä preferred. He normally engaged at 250 to 350 meters, but the tactical situation did not allow for ideal positioning. He settled his new rifle against a damaged log, aligned his iron sights on a Soviet officer's chest, and fired. The officer fell. Soviet soldiers near the officer hesitated, confused, looking around for the source of the shot. Häyhä fired again, killing a Soviet soldier who was carrying a radio. He fired a third time, hitting a soldier who appeared to be a squad leader based on his position and the way other soldiers were looking at him. Over the next 8 minutes, before the Soviet assault resumed, Simo Häyhä killed 11 Soviet soldiers with 11 shots from his new rifle. The Soviet assault resumed at 1,520 hours. It collapsed at 1,537 hours. The loss of officers and NCOs during the 12-minute pause had disrupted Soviet unit cohesion. Soldiers advanced without proper coordination. Platoons lost contact with each other. The assault degenerated into disorganized small groups advancing independently, and Finnish machine gun crews destroyed them piecemeal. By 1600 hours, the Soviet 44th Rifle Division was in full retreat, having lost over 800 soldiers killed and more than 1,400 wounded in a single day. Simo Häyhä had survived the largest Soviet offensive of the Winter War. His confirmed kill count from March 7th was 11, bringing his total to 347 confirmed kills in 98 days of combat. But his war was not over. The most dangerous moment was still ahead. March 13th, 1940. 1,045 hours. Kollaa sector. The Soviet-Finnish ceasefire was scheduled to take effect at 1,100 hours, in 15 minutes. Both sides had been informed that all combat operations would cease at that time. Finnish soldiers were already beginning to relax, standing up in trenches, smoking cigarettes, talking about going home. Soviet soldiers were doing the same, emerging from fighting positions, waving cautiously at Finnish lines. Simo Häyhä was in a forward observation position, watching the Soviet lines through his iron sights. He had been ordered by his company commander to remain in position until the official ceasefire took effect, specifically because Soviet soldiers had a history of conducting last-minute attacks in the final minutes before ceasefires. At 1,047 hours, Häyhä observed a Soviet soldier approximately 250 meters forward the Finnish line, moving through the ruins of a destroyed farmhouse. The soldier was not behaving like someone preparing for a ceasefire. He was moving tactically, staying low, using cover. Most critically, he was carrying what appeared to be a scope rifle. Häyhä watched for 3 minutes, analyzing the soldier's movements, and concluded that he was observing a Soviet counter-sniper, one of the specialists who had been hunting him for the past 2 months. At 1,050 hours, 10 minutes before the ceasefire, Simo Häyhä made a decision that has been debated by military historians ever since. He aimed at the Soviet soldier and fired. The Soviet soldier was not a counter-sniper. He was a Soviet infantryman named Alexei Dmitrievich Novikov, 23 years old, from a farming village near Minsk. He was carrying a standard Mosin-Nagant rifle, not a scope weapon. Häyhä had misidentified the rifle type in the poor lighting conditions. Novikov had been moving tactically not because he was conducting reconnaissance, but because Soviet officers had warned their soldiers that Finnish snipers might fire in the final minutes before the ceasefire. He was trying to stay alive until 1,100 hours. Simo Häyhä's shot missed. The round passed within 6 inches of Novikov's head, but did not hit him. Novikov, trained in counter-sniper procedures, immediately identified the direction of Häyhä's shot based on the sound of the bullet's supersonic crack. He dropped prone, brought his rifle to his shoulder, and fired the location where he estimated the Finnish sniper was positioned. Novikov's shot, fired from an unsupported prone position at an estimated target 250 meters away, was the luckiest shot in the entire Winter War. The 7.62x54 MMR bullet hit Simo Häyhä in the left side of his face, entering through his left cheek and exiting to the right side of his jaw. The bullet did not hit his brain, but destroyed his lower jaw, shattered multiple teeth, and caused catastrophic soft tissue damage to his face. The impact knocked Häyhä unconscious instantly. He collapsed in his position, blood pouring from a massive facial wound. Finnish soldiers in nearby positions saw Häyhä fall and immediately called for medics. 2 soldiers, Privates Olli Helma and Tauno Koivisto, crawled to Häyhä's position under continued Soviet fire. The ceasefire had not yet taken effect, and Soviet soldiers were still shooting at Finnish positions. Helma and Koivisto reached Häyhä at 1,054 hours. He was unconscious, his face destroyed, barely breathing. Helma later stated in his after-action report that he assumed Häyhä was dying and that their evacuation was essentially a body recovery rather than a rescue. They dragged Häyhä 300 meters back to Finnish rear positions, with Soviet bullets snapping through the air around them. They reached the company aid station at 1,102 hours, 2 minutes after the ceasefire had officially taken effect. The company medic, Corporal Heikki Koivisto, examined Häyhä and concluded that he needed immediate surgical intervention or he would die from blood loss within the hour. But the nearest field hospital capable of facial surgery was 42 kilometers away, over roads that were barely passable due to snow and ice. The evacuation would take at least 2 hours, possibly longer. At 1,110 hours, Simo Häyhä was loaded onto a horse-drawn sled, the only transportation available in the Kollaa sector. The sled traveled 42 kilometers in 3 hours and 17 minutes, with Häyhä unconscious and bleeding for the entire journey. He arrived at the field hospital in Viipuri at 1,427 hours on March 13, 1940. Surgeons operated immediately, working for 6 hours to stabilize his facial injuries, control bleeding, and prevent infection. Häyhä remained in a coma for 6 days. Finnish doctors gave him a 30% chance of survival. His face was so badly damaged that identification was initially difficult. Doctors confirmed his identity through fingerprint comparison with military records. Finnish military command assumed he would die, and Captain Arn Jutalainen drafted an official letter of condolence to be sent to Häyhä's family. On March 19, 1940, Simo Häyhä regained consciousness. The first thing he saw was a Finnish nurse standing beside his hospital bed. He tried to ask where he was, but his jaw was wired shut and he could not speak. The nurse handed him a piece of paper and a pencil. Häyhä wrote, "We're over, The nurse nodded and wrote back, "Yes. Finland signed peace treaty March 13th. War ended same day you were wounded." Simo Häyhä had survived 505 confirmed kills across 98 days of combat. He had survived Soviet artillery barges, direct fire ambushes, dedicated counter-sniper teams, and manhunts involving thousands of enemy soldiers. He had been wounded by a random shot, fired by an ordinary Soviet infantryman. 7 minutes before the war ended, he would live for 62 more years, but he would never snipe again. March 1940 through April 2002, 6 decades of legacy. Simo Häyhä was discharged from the Finnish Army Hospital in Viipuri on July 14, 1940, after 4 months of reconstructive surgery and physical rehabilitation. His face had been rebuilt through multiple surgical procedures, but the damage was permanent. His left cheek was severely scarred, his jaw was partially reconstructed with bone grafts, and he had lost most of his teeth on the left side of his mouth. He could speak, but his speech was slurred and difficult to understand. He could eat, but only soft foods. His appearance was so dramatically changed that people who had known him before the war sometimes failed to recognize him. The Finnish government promoted him from corporal to second lieutenant, a battlefield promotion that recognized his extraordinary service. He was awarded the Medal of Liberty, first class, the highest military decoration Finland could bestow. He received personal letters of commendation from Marshal Carl Gustav Mannerheim, the commander-in-chief of Finnish Defense Forces, and from President Risto Ryti. Soviet intelligence, which had spent months trying to kill him, confirmed through intercepted radio communications that the White Death had been wounded and was no longer operational, a confirmation that Soviet commanders celebrated as enthusiastically as Finnish commanders mourned. Simo Häyhä returned to Rotjärvi in August 1940 and attempted to resume his pre-war life. The Soviet Union had annexed the territory where his farm was located as part of the Moscow Peace Treaty, so he had lost his land. The Finnish government provided him with replacement property in Ruokolahti, approximately 60 kilometers from his original farm. He rebuilt his life slowly, methodically, with the same patient determination he had applied to hunting and sniping. He cleared land, built a house, planted crops. He never married. He rarely spoke about the war, but his legacy was already spreading far beyond Finland. Soviet military intelligence compiled a comprehensive report on Finnish sniper tactics in April 1940, immediately after the Winter War ended. The report, classified secret and distributed to Soviet Rifle Division commanders, analyzed Finnish sniper methodology with the same attention to detail that Soviet engineers applied to captured enemy weapons. The report identified Simo Häyhä by name and confirmed his kill count as at least 500 Soviet soldiers, possibly more. The report described his tactics: preference for iron sights, use of natural camouflage, extreme patience, selective targeting of officers and key personnel, constant position changes, and willingness to operate alone without support. Most critically, the Soviet report concluded that Finnish sniper tactics had achieved strategic impact disproportionate to the resources invested. A single Finnish soldier, armed with an unmodified hunting rifle, had paralyzed offensive operations by an entire Soviet rifle division. The report recommended that the Soviet Army establish formal sniper training schools, develop doctrine for sniper employment, and create specialized equipment for snipers. These recommendations were implemented during 1940 and 1941, and they would have massive impact during World War II. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, the Red Army was the only major military force in the world with formal sniper doctrine and dedicated sniper training programs. Soviet snipers achieved extraordinary results during World War II, with multiple Soviet snipers exceeding 200 confirmed kills. The most famous Soviet sniper, Lyudmila Pavlichenko, killed 309 German soldiers during the siege of Odessa and the Battle of Sevastopol. Soviet sniper doctrine emphasized the same principles that Simo Häyhä had demonstrated during the Winter War: patience, camouflage, selective targeting, and psychological impact on enemy morale. American military observers studied Soviet sniper tactics during World War II and were stunned by their effectiveness. The United States Marine Corps had employed snipers during World War I, but the program had been discontinued during the interwar period. In 1942, the Marine Corps re-established formal sniper training at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, using doctrine derived largely from Soviet methods, which were themselves derived from Finnish Winter War practices. The first Marine Corps sniper manual, published in 1943, included specific references to the Finnish sniper who killed over 500 Soviet soldiers, and recommended that American snipers study his methodology. The most significant long-term impact of Simo Häyhä's Winter War service was the establishment of sniping as a permanent, professional military specialty rather than an improvised wartime expedient. Before the Winter War, most military forces viewed snipers as hunters with rifles, useful in specific situations but not essential to overall combat operations. After the Winter War, military planners understood that highly skilled snipers could achieve strategic effects far beyond their numerical strength. By the end of World War II, every major military force in the world had established formal sniper programs, and those programs continued to this century. Simo Häyhä lived quietly in Ruokolahti for 62 years after the Winter War ended. He hunted elk and moose in the forest surrounding his property, using the same techniques he had employed during the war. He occasionally gave interviews to Finnish journalists, always brief and understated, never sensationalizing his military service. When asked about his kill count, he typically said, "I did what I had to do and what I was capable of doing." When asked how he felt about killing over 500 Soviet soldiers, he said, "The war was forced upon us. I had no choice." He never expressed regret for his actions during the Winter War. He also never expressed pride. To Häyhä, military service was a duty that circumstances had required him to perform, not fundamentally different from planting crops or repairing fences, work that needed to be done. So he did it. Finnish historians who interviewed Häyhä in his later years were struck by his complete lack of psychological trauma or post-war adjustment difficulties. Many veterans of intense combat experienced nightmares, flashbacks, or PTSD symptoms. Häyhä showed none of these. When asked about this in a 1998 interview, he offered a simple explanation. "I was hunting. Hunters do not have nightmares about successful hunts." This statement disturbed some modern psychologists, who interpreted it as evidence of dissociation or emotional suppression. But Häyhä's perspective was consistent with rural Finnish culture of the early 20th century, where hunting was both economic necessity and cultural identity. He had killed Soviet soldiers the same way he killed elk, as a necessary task, performed with skill, with no emotional investment beyond the satisfaction of work done well. The mythology around Simo Häyhä grew substantially during the Cold War. Soviet veterans who had fought in the Winter War told stories about the White Death to younger soldiers, often exaggerating his capabilities to legendary proportions. Some Soviet accounts claimed he could kill targets at 1,000 meters, impossible with iron sights. Some claimed he was supernaturally immune to cold. Some claimed he could become invisible. Finnish veterans contributed their own myths, describing Häyhä as simultaneously appearing in multiple locations or knowing enemy positions through unexplained intuition. Häyhä himself found these myths amusing. In a 1997 interview, he said, "People want stories to be more interesting than reality. Reality is that I was a farmer who could shoot straight. That is not exciting enough for some people. So they add magic." When pressed about specific legendary incidents, Häyhä consistently declined to confirm or deny them, saying, "If people want to believe stories, let them believe. The truth is in the Finnish army records. Those records are precise and detailed." Finnish military archives contain Captain Arnjalainen's daily combat logs for 6th Company, JR-34, covering the entire Winter War period. The logs record 505 confirmed sniper kills attributed to Simo Häyhä between November 30th, 1939 and March 6, 1940, a 98-day period. The logs also record an estimated 200 Soviet soldiers killed by Häyhä using his KP/31 submachine gun during close-quarters combat when Soviet forces overran Finnish positions. Finnish military historians consider these records reliable because they were contemporaneous, written during the war, not reconstructed afterward, and because they were verified by multiple witnesses. Comparative analysis with other Winter War snipers confirms that Häyhä's kill count, while extraordinary, was not impossibly outside the range of other Finnish snipers. The second most successful Finnish sniper during the Winter War was Simo Häyhä, who achieved 204 confirmed kills in the same time period. Multiple other Finnish snipers exceeded 100 confirmed kills. What made Häyhä unique was not that he killed Soviet soldiers. Many Finnish snipers did that effectively, but that he killed them so consistently across such a sustained period while operating under the most intense counter-sniper pressure ever directed at a single individual. Soviet military records, declassified in the 1990s after the collapse of the Soviet Union, indirectly confirm Häyhä's impact. After-action reports from the Soviet 44th Rifle Division document catastrophic officer casualties in the Kollaa sector during December 1939 through March 1940. The report specifically mentioned Finnish sniper activity as the primary cause of command and control failures. Soviet personnel records show that the 44th Rifle Division lost 73 officers killed during the Winter War, an extraordinarily high number for a division that was never encircled or destroyed. Finnish military analysts estimate that Simo Häyhä personally killed between 27 and 34 of those 73 officers, based on his targeting priorities and the geographical concentration of Soviet officer casualties in the Kollaa sector. The long-term tactical legacy of Simo Häyhä's Winter War service can be seen in modern sniper doctrine used by military forces worldwide. Contemporary sniper training emphasizes the same principles Häyhä demonstrated: use of natural camouflage, preference of concealment over armor protection, selective targeting of high-value personnel, constant position changes, and operational independence. Modern military snipers are trained to operate alone or in two-person teams, without direct supervision, making independent tactical decisions based on battlefield observation, exactly the methodology Häyhä employed. The preference for iron sights versus telescopic sights remains debated in modern sniper doctrine, but Häyhä's success with iron sights forced military planners to recognize that magnification is not always optimal. Modern military snipers are trained to use both telescopic sights and backup iron sights, and they are taught that iron sights may be preferable in extreme cold, during night operations, or when reducing visible profile is critical. The United States Marine Corps Scout Sniper Course includes specific training on iron sight shooting at ranges up to 300 meters, directly derived from Winter War lessons. Simo Häyhä died on April 1, 2002, at the age of 96, in a veterans nursing home in Hämeenlinna, Finland. His death was from natural causes, age-related organ failure. He had outlived most of his Winter War contemporaries by decades. Finnish newspapers published obituaries describing him as the greatest sniper in military history and the White Death who terrified the Red Army. Soviet veterans, many of whom were still alive in 2002, were interviewed about their memories of the White Death. Most described him not as an enemy but as a natural force, something like an avalanche or a blizzard that killed randomly and could not be fought with conventional tactics. The Finnish military conducted a full honors funeral. Simo Häyhä was buried in Ruokolahti, near the farm where he had lived for 62 years after the war. His grave marker is simple: name, dates, rank. No mention of his kill count. No description of his military service. When Finnish veterans were asked why the marker was so understated, they said, Simo would not have wanted attention. He did his duty, survived, and lived his life. That is what matters. But his impact on military history cannot be understated. Every modern military force trains snipers using doctrine that derives, at least partially, from lessons learned during the Winter War. The concept of the sniper as a precision weapon capable of strategic impact, rather than just a skilled rifleman, originates from Häyhä's demonstrated effectiveness. The understanding that a single highly trained soldier can paralyze enemy operations through psychological pressure comes directly from Soviet after-action reports analyzing why the 44th Rifle Division failed to break through Finnish lines in the Kollaa sector. Modern military historians debate whether Simo Häyhä should be celebrated or studied with caution. Some argue that his story glorifies individual violence and creates unrealistic expectations about what snipers can achieve. Others argue that his story demonstrates the importance of training, discipline, and adaptation in combat, lessons that remain relevant regardless of changing technology. The consensus among military professionals is that Häyhä's Winter War service provides valuable insights into how exceptional individuals can achieve extraordinary results when skill, experience, and tactical opportunity align. The mythology of the White Death persists into the 21st century. Video games, novels, films, and internet discussions portray Simo Häyhä as a superhuman warrior, often exaggerating his capabilities beyond what historical records support. But beneath the mythology is a verifiable historical fact. A 33-year-old Finnish farmer, armed with an unmodified hunting rifle, killed 505 Soviet soldiers in 98 days and survived the most intensive manhunt in modern military history. He was not supernatural. He was not invincible. He was simply extremely good at a specific set of skills that circumstances required him to employ. And in doing so, he changed military doctrine permanently. The final assessment of Simo Häyhä's legacy comes from an unexpected source: a 1991 interview with retired Soviet General Dmitry Ivanovich Pavlenko, who had served as a junior officer in the 44th Rifle Division during the Winter War. When asked about the White Death, Pavlenko said, "We thought we were fighting an army. We were wrong. We were fighting a force that had decided to kill us." Häyhä was not a soldier in the way we understood soldiers. He was a force itself, and you cannot defeat a force with rifles and tanks. That assessment captures the essence of Simo Häyhä's impact. He was not just a skilled sniper. He was a man who understood his environment so completely that he became indistinguishable from it, and that made him the most dangerous individual combatant in modern military history.